Well, so I have invited Keene to be the grand finale, and Keene Haywood is right here at UT Austin, but he has been many different places. Um, I just asked him what his new title is because even since we published, the program, things have changed. And he is now the interim director of the technology group for CTL, Center for Technology and Learning. Did I get that? Teaching and Learning. I just know it by CATTLE. That's the acronym, CATTLE here in Texas. CTL, Center for Teaching and Learning here on our campus. What I asked Keene to do is to keep us awake at this hour, number one. And he is a pretty incredible person because I kind of see him as, again, a visionary, but somebody who is up on all the trends of digital technology. So he's our trend meister for CTL. He has a really interesting profile. He's got a PhD in geography, so think digital maps. He came then, had a stint at National Geographic. He also has a background in videographies. He has an MFA. So this guy knows a lot about media, but I asked him, I reminded him that he's speaking to LRCs were centrally about publishing materials, and languages. So that's the intersections that he's going to focus on today on online publishing, and tell us a little bit about the trends. And one other note about in his portfolio, he worked at New Media Consortium, which is here. You might talk a little bit about that. They publish an annual report called the Horizon Report. Horizon Report,
yeah.
Which is all about the trends on the internet. So 1 year out, 2 years out, and even five years out. Who knows what it'll be in 5 years, but they actually publish that. So that's what he's going to be talking to us today about.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Carl. Everyone hear me okay? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, thanks and welcome to Austin. For those of you who haven't been here, I'm sorry you missed our lovely summer, which was unbearable. But now we're getting into fall, so it's going to be hopefully a much nicer season for us. So yeah, like Carl said, he asked me to kind of present some material on kind of looking forward in the world of publishing and intersection of mobile and kind of emerging technologies. So. I titled this talk "The Next Words" because I think we're kind of at an interesting point right now with technology and words, and so I kind of wanted to give an overview of where we're kind of headed. And so I wanted to start out with a quote actually, and if you want to just take a second and look at this, the problem is the people under the age of 35 don't sit behind desks and they don't spend all of their time lovingly tending to documents. So I think that's something that we can all sort of relate to, seeing happening around us. And they'll be dealing with streams of information that will be coming at them in much smaller chunks and much larger numbers. So that is the information overload tidal wave that we're facing right now. And finally, so we're moving into a new post-document era, and we will need different solutions. So this was uttered a few months ago by Paul Maritz, who's the CEO of VMware, which is a virtualization company. But it kind of stuck with me because I think it kind of sums up some of the challenges that we're facing, especially in the publishing world and dealing with people who are just inundated with a lot of information. So some of these solutions I think can be found in kind of three broad areas. Mobile devices obviously is a big one. And then as the mobile devices proliferate and mature, we're seeing services, platforms, and applications emerge that kind of tie into that. And then finally, there's some new emerging technologies that are enabling us to use language, use words, use publishing platforms in new ways. So I'm going to kind of focus on these three broad areas today. And I have a few video examples of some new technologies that you can take a look at as well. They're not out yet, but they will be soon. So the move to mobile, it's no secret that that's happening very quickly, and by 2015 there's going to be more people accessing the internet via mobile devices than hardwired PCs. So that's just a few years out from now. And then also by 2015 there'll be 2.7 billion users of the internet. That's about 40% of the world's population, and that's not broken out into developing countries and non-developing countries, but 40% of the global population, which might not seem like a lot, but that's a lot. 2.7 billion regular users of the internet, and most of them will be on mobile devices. So definitely that's a platform and technology that you just cannot ignore anymore, and that includes the publishers. So with this new class of mobile devices, we're seeing kind of a rapid development. I mean, in earlier stages of technology, you really saw sort of longer adoption cycles, longer development cycles. Now things are moving very quickly, and you're probably familiar with Moore's Law. It talks about the evolution of processors. Mobile devices are rapidly gaining the same kinds of strengths that desktop PCs have, and may someday even surpass some of that in some ways. So it's important to realize the power of these things. They're really becoming powerful, and you can do more and more with them. And so this is just a smattering of them. Obviously, the ubiquitous iPhone, the iPad. Down below there is an Android phone from Samsung. There's a Samsung tablet. And then finally, that's the new Kindle Fire on the far left that you've probably heard a little bit about. It's an e-reader device that can do a little more than just be an e-reader. Smartphones are really the thing that everyone's been talking about, and those are just becoming kind of an essential item in the modern world today. I mean, everyone has a smartphone for the most part, or will probably get a smartphone in the next couple of years. And the thing that's interesting about them is what they're starting to put in the smartphones now, because these devices have all kinds of sensors that are really geared towards the mobile user. They have proximity sensors in them, they have accelerometers, they have GPS chips, they are getting better and better cameras in them, they can shoot high definition video, they're getting larger storage. I mean, there's a lot you can do. I mean, the only thing that really is a hindrance is the screen size. And even that, with the higher resolution screens, you're getting pretty good screen experience even in a small handheld device. So as you all probably know, the new iPhone is going to be coming out Friday, the iPhone 4S, and it has a dual-core processor, which is pretty significant to have that. Now, some of the Android phones have dual-core processors too already, and but you're seeing this rapid adoption of advanced technology in these mobile devices, and that's going to have a big impact on things going forward. The same goes for the tablets, and obviously the tablet world it's not really new because Microsoft had the tablet PCs a while back, but Apple kind of refined the category and really pushed it out into the public in new ways. And a lot of that had to do with rethinking the interface. The PC tablet, it wasn't really geared towards a touch interface. It tried to replicate the desktop experience. Apple's iPad doesn't do that. It's a total touch paradigm. And that's, I think, the gesture-based computing and the touch screens are definitely the way forward, and you're going to be interacting with your device more and more like that. And you're also going to be interacting more and more with your voice, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, the tablets are also, like the phones, gaining more powerful processors, and you can do more and more with them. The other thing that's significant about these mobile devices is power. These things will stay powered up all day long. You don't have to worry about finding a power outlet all the time. And that's a big plus too when you're on the go and you're moving around. So, and then finally in this class of devices, I just wanted to mention e-readers. And I don't know, do you all use Kindles? Do you all have Kindles? You use them? You like them? Yeah. So they're great devices. They're kind of a niche. They do one thing, but they do it pretty well. And I think it really opened the door for ebooks to take place and be adopted by a large group of people. So the top screen there, or the top image, is the Fire, the Amazon Fire. And so I think that'll be an interesting device. I kind of look at it as a conduit into Amazon's store ecosystem, but at the same time I think it's going to have a nice touch screen. It runs Android, but Google didn't have a lot to do with it other than putting out the source code. Amazon took it and completely retooled it for their purposes. I think it'll be a good device. It'll be interesting, and then Amazon will be releasing several other types of Kindles too, which will have a touch interface, which will be nice. So everything's kind of moving in that direction. So anyway, that's just an overview of kind of the devices in which we will interact with more and more in the next few years. So okay, so what? So all these people using mobile devices and all these things kind of in everyone's pockets and hands. So what does all that sort of mean? And well, it means that we're seeing some new forms of services and applications. For a long time, we just had the desktop system, right? And we had kind of the desktop metaphor, and we had the mouse and the point and click and all that. And that's how applications were developed, were for that environment. Well, now we have a whole new type of device that you use with your fingers, you touch, use gestures. It's opening up a whole new way of interacting with your devices. And so it's sort of like a new dawn for application developers. And I think that's why people have just flocked to like the iOS development and Android development, because this is a whole new platform it's a whole new world for these developers to think out of the box and create new applications. So And so this is another quote that kind of struck me a while back, and I think for the next generation of companies, the application they deliver on the mobile side is way more important than the website. And that was said by Dalton Caldwell. I don't know if you know who he is. He's the guy that started Napster, the infamous Napster. He's kind of a digital music entrepreneur. And so this sort of stuck with me because you know, you hear more and more that people are increasingly accessing internet content through apps, not necessarily the web browser, so to speak. So, and this is just some recent numbers here. You can't really see the numbers, but the important thing is the red trajectory that's just shooting straight up. So September 2008 to September of this year, that's the trajectory of apps that have been downloaded by people. So we're downloading 34 million iOS apps a day and 1 billion iOS apps a month. So there's an app for literally everything. And there's some interesting apps too for the publishing world and for people that deal with text and deal with those kinds of materials. So anyway, I think that's just important to realize how huge of a tidal wave of change this is. This is a very fast adoption in just 3 years to see this kind of uptake on a whole new way of computing. So pretty impressive. So that gets into the specifics of app development. And one thing that I think a lot of people look at app development and they go, God, well, I'm not a programmer, and that's real expensive, and that's really difficult to do. And you know, it should be great to have an app, but I just don't think I can do it. Well, there's as these devices have exploded and now millions of people have them, you're starting to see an ecosystem of services and programs that can help you develop apps much more easily. So you don't have to be a programmer necessarily. And these are just a few examples here. The Mac App Zine that you see 2.0 up there, that's really geared towards publishers to quickly create applications for their devices, for their content. And that's been a company that's been looked at quite a bit recently. This Nimble Kit that's listed down below here, that will enable you, all you need to know, if you have an HTML and CSS developer, you can develop an app, and it's a native app. It compiles natively for the iOS. And so it's really nice. You don't need to know the complexities of programming Cocoa, which is a fairly complex programming language. So if you have a web developer, you could say, hey, you know what, I'm interested in developing an app, and this is not a web app, this is a self-contained executable app that lives on the iPhone or the iPad that you can do with NimbleKit, and it's very inexpensive, and they have documentation for it and everything. So if you work with some developers at your university or whatnot and you're thinking about apps, you don't really have to go down the road of full-blown, I need to hire a full-blown developer. You can look at some of these services and go down that route. Now you're not going to have as much customization necessarily, but it can still get you in the game. And now some of these are web apps. You see S-Web apps up there. They might help you develop a web application. Yes?
I'm just curious. I just sent a picture of these to our programmer, basically, who's overloaded as it is.
Yeah.
And I think writing our apps from scratch.
Yeah. Okay.
How much, in your, if you know, like, is this a possible time saver for somebody who does know how to code, but just...
Yeah, it can be a big time saver, especially like Model Baker up there and NimbleKit. Those two, if you are a programmer and kind of know the ins and outs of programming, generally, you can get up to speed very fast with those. You could have an app, you know, in a day or two, probably, you know, a simple app. But yeah, the other ones are a little more geared towards folks that have not done any programming at all. Model Baker and NimbleKit allow you to mess with the code. NimbleKit, you actually have to have the Xcode installed on your machine to develop with it. But you do it all through CSS and HTML, and it generates the Cocoa code to interact with that and make it an executable native app. Yeah, it's not terribly difficult if you have a programmer who knows what they're doing. So yeah, sure. Yeah, and stop me if you have any questions. I'm happy to stop here and answer questions since we're a little ahead of things. These are two applications you're probably very familiar with or heard about. If you Flipboard, you've all heard about Flipboard, and then Zeit, and I believe Yahoo just bought Zeit. But these are two applications that came out for the iPad that have gained a lot of traction. They got a lot of attention because they completely rethought the way we interact with information on a tablet device. And when you go back to that quote I mentioned earlier about developers are going to develop apps before they develop a website, these are good examples of that, because these developers that developed Flipboard and Zeit, they said, you know, we've got all this information, and if I look at a website that's really designed for a desktop environment, I've got ads and I've got kind of all this clutter. And I want to have an application that is as intuitive and flows as smoothly as the device that I'm using. Oh, excuse me, that I'm using it on. So they kind of rethought how we were going to interact with that kind of information. And so what Flipboard has done is essentially made a publishing platform that allows you to in a very fluid way look at a lot of content. And it's very nicely done. It's laid out very well. It's fast. It's intuitive, and Zeit is very similar. Zeit's almost a copycat of Flipboard in a lot of ways. So that's the kind of thing we're kind of looking at going forward. So you're not necessarily developing for a website. You're developing an app that can deliver this content onto these devices.
Could you give an example for somebody who just not like
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Sure. Sure.
give an example of using Flipboard?
I can actually. I'll show you right here. And it is kind of, it's nice to see it in action actually. And I'll hold it up and hopefully you can. So when it launches, and it can be tied into like your social networks or whatever. That's my Facebook on there. But anyway, so you flip it open, and then I've got different things like, let's go to, go to the New Yorker, for instance. So do you see how do you see that? Yeah. And you can touch that, and it opens up like that. It's just really nice. And you can, the network's a little slow here, but anyway, so you get this, so you don't have a lot of clutter. You can see that, how that's laid out. It's very nice. And you can just kind of flip through it. And it's just a very intuitive, it's not like a book, but it's kind of like a book. And you can save these things out. You can email an article. You can use it, share it on social networks, all those kinds of things. So it's all touch. It's pretty intuitive how to use it, and you can just flip through it. That's why it's called Flipboard. So, and Zeit's very similar to this. It looks very, very similar. So, and you can customize this however you want. And basically, what they're doing is they're taking RSS feeds from different sites, and they're reconfiguring. You can look at it in that way as well. You can either way, and they're reconfiguring this to look the way it does on this application. So,
But the content is something you add to it?
yes, you can choose. You can choose. Yeah, you have the ability to configure what you want to add to it. Right. So if you have certain websites you like to look at, you can add them to this, and it will show it. So that's where I'm getting at. This app is becoming more important than the website necessarily, because this is all content. It's just reformatted to be used in a different way. So
one thing that's fascinating about this, it has no content of its own.
exactly. Right, that's right. It's a delivery. Yeah, it's an aggregate. Yeah, exactly. It's an aggregation device. And I'll get into that a little bit more because that's an important thing as we deal with this flood of information that we're all dealing with. So anyway, check those out if you have an iPad. They're worth looking at. Flipboard's free. Zeit is too, I believe, yeah. But I don't know what Yahoo is infamous for buying companies and not doing a thing with them. So I don't know what they're going to do with Zeit. So anyway, now I wanted to mention these three. These are services. They're all free. Now these are very interesting because what they're doing is initially they were designed to, again, kind of like Flipboard does, it makes websites a little more friendly to read. And if you're someone that's dealing with a lot of text and you really want to read something carefully, or you want to read without a lot of distraction, using something like Instapaper or Readability or Read It Later can take a web page and it reformats it into a very readable format. It gets rid of all the ads. You can customize the fonts. You can customize the size of the fonts, the type of font, the background color. You can do a lot of different things with these services. And so but what I've discovered is that they're really great sort of repositories. You can create archives. I have a huge archive in Instapaper that I have. And with one click, I can send a web page to Instapaper and save it out in this nicely formatted version that doesn't have all the ads and everything. And I just get the content. I just get the story. I don't get all the other gobbledygook. And so it's really great. And with Instapaper in particular, you can reformat your articles for Kindle. You can print them out. You can download a spreadsheet that has all your article URLs in them. It's just really a great repository. They have a great yes. Yeah, they're free. Actually, the iOS apps for Instapaper Read It Later are not free. but they're not very expensive, and they're excellent. They're really good. So anyway, this is a good example of, again, taking websites where you've got a lot of distractions and you've got kind of the old paradigm of looking at a website that was designed for the desktop, reformatting this content so you really get the content and you're able to focus on the content and read it. And what's nice about readability is there's hooks into it. There's an API. You can embed it into your website, and so you can click a button and make your content instantly more readable for your visitors. Yeah?
So you're talking about that it takes the content that was developed for the old paradigm of the web
Mm-hmm.
to the older paradigm of the print book.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it more readable. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yes?
How does it deal with the writing systems? I mean, is there any, does this go as text or graphics or what?
It will save the graphics and the text, and it won't save anything else. It'll strip out like any sort of it looks at the HTML of the page, and it strips out any kind of links that, like sidebar links or any side navigation stuff or anything like that. You just get the body of the text and images that are embedded in the story.
Still remains
Yeah.
text file, so you can.
Yeah.
How does it deal with all different language ones? Like
You know, I think Instapaper literally is developed by one guy, and his name is Marco Armet, and he's a very well-known developer. But I don't know about that. Readability, I think, supports other languages. Readability is interesting because they have an interesting business model, because what they've said is like, look, when we do this to your webpage, we're stripping out all the ads and everything, and so it's kind of ripping off the advertisers. They're not, but so what they do is, if there's a paid version of Readability, it's very inexpensive. And what it does is it looks at all the sites that you visit and you run through Readability, and it actually pays the publisher of those sites a few pennies. So the publisher actually gets something, because they're kind of stripping away all their advertising revenue, by using this. But they're interesting services, and I think what's interesting about them is you can use that content in different ways. Like I said, there's RSS feeds that come out of this thing. You can organize your content in folders. You can tag things and read it later. And then you've got this nicely formatted content that is a little more usable. It's better for searching. It's better for real reading. And it was really designed to read content better on the web. That's what these were all designed for. So, yeah. So I also wanted to mention these services. Some of them are old. Delicious had kind of run a long, tortured history, and a lot of people have probably used Delicious here, but Delicious, as you know, was spun off from Yahoo. It was bought by the YouTube founders, and they have recently relaunched it, and so far the new launch is kind of, I don't know what they're going to do with it. It's not quite the same. So it does, yeah, yeah, there's stacks, and it's just kind of like, man, it had a lot of promise, but I only mention it because it was kind of the leader of the pack in terms of social bookmarking and that sort of thing. The one that I think is picking up a lot of the slack is Pinboard, listed over there. Pinboard's a wonderful bookmarking service. It's very, very fast. What's cool about Pinboard, and I use it kind of as my catch-all digital locker, because what I can do is I can tell it to save my Instapaper links. I can tell it to save all my Twitter favorites, all my tweets. I can tell it to save all my Read It Later articles. It archives all of that stuff into Pinboard. And then if you want to, for a small fee, like $5 a year, you can get a paid version of Pinboard, and it will download and archive every web page that you save to it. So if you are doing research later on, it will have that web page, whether that page is live or not anymore, will be archived for you, and it's fully searchable. And then you can download your content with RSS feeds in Pinboard. And it's no mistake that the developers of Pinboard, one of the developers used to work on Delicious and left after Yahoo bought it. And so anyway, I mentioned these services. Digo is another one that a lot of people like because it has a lot of extensive ability to annotate web pages. And then Evernote has really become a ubiquitous service. It's hooked into a lot of things now. And I need to back up the services I mentioned earlier. They're great because they've opened their application programming interface, or API, to really link into other services. So if you're a developer and you have content and you want to use Instapaper, you can easily do that. And the same goes for these, and that's what Evernote has done. And so Evernote's got a lot of traction right now as a note-taking repository. So if you all don't know about Evernote, it's an ability it's like a note-taking application, and it syncs to the cloud. So any note that you take on your computer, you whip out your iPhone, it's available there, it's available on your iPad. You can even share, it creates notebooks that you can store notes into, and you can share those notebooks with colleagues if you want to. You can tag everything, has a great search engine capability. So Evernote's really getting a lot of steam. It's gotten a lot of funding, and I think it's going to have a pretty long history. They said they've built the company to last 100 years, so whatever that means. Scribble in the middle there is very interesting because that is an NSF-funded project. A graduate student started that about 2 years ago, maybe a year ago. And it's another web page annotation tool, and it's free. And it allows you to annotate your web page and then export your annotations in a nicely formatted way so that you can use them in your research papers and whatnot. So that's a service worth looking at. But I mention all of these basically because these are tools that help you, aggregate your own information, mark it up, share it with other people, and use it as a way to kind of store information on the web for yourself. If you're doing research or you're working with a colleague, these are nice tools to look at. These are not all of them, but these are kind of some of the big players. So, any questions about those? No? Okay. So I wanted to also mention these three things because I think these are getting at something that's I think very interesting in terms of text. For millennia we've had books, and everyone loves books. I love the feel of book. I love how it handles, and I kind of get a little bit sad when I say everything's moving digital. But the one thing about a book is that all the content is in here, and it can't go anywhere else. It can't talk to another book or whatever. So what I think's happening is that we're starting to see people think about, well, what if we can start getting books to talk to each other? How can we intermix books, and how can we intermix content? And I don't know if you all know the writer Stephen Johnson. He's a tech writer. He's a fabulous writer, really good researcher, and he has a new book that's out. It's called Where Good Ideas Come From. And he's got this notion that he's like, one day I want to be able to have my digital library, and when I click on a passage in my library, I want to be able to see all the related types of readings that are in my library, looking at that kind of level of context. And so I think we're getting there, and I think findings.com is a service that he's developed with some other people. It hasn't launched yet, but you can go to findings.com and you can kind of read a little bit about it. But it's a way for people to share passages of books with each other. So you're sort of getting at this notion of sort of finding the best of things that you're reading, aggregating them together, and sharing them with people. And Amazon's Kindle social annotations is kind of the same way. If you use the Kindle and you use the annotations that are available on the Kindle, you can turn those on so they're public. They're anonymous, but they're public, so that you can see what other people have annotated in that book, and then they can see your annotations, and it gives you an idea of what people have thought is important. I find it just kind of interesting to look at what people have marked up in a book. And Amazon, for a while, I use the Kindle app on my phone and my iPad. I don't actually have a Kindle, and I think you have to own a Kindle to have this happen. But if you used to be able to export your annotations as a text file, and I think you can still do that if you own a Kindle, but not if you're using the apps. Anyway, at some point, it's going to be great to be able to annotate these things all digitally and export these out into a nice archive that you can have your annotations, because that's one of the great things about having a digital book, is that you can annotate things pretty easily. But right now, we're not good at sharing that information, getting that information out of those books. The final thing on this slide is the Goodreads recommendation engine. I don't know if you've seen Goodreads or not. It's an interesting website. But what's really cool is they have a really interesting search algorithm. They actually have a lot more recommendations than Amazon does. They have very avid readers, and they have recently upgraded their recommendation engine. And so what it does now is it tries to predict what would be good for you to read next. So it looks at the library that you've added, it looks at what your friends have looked at, and it kind of looks at the trends of how you've been reading, and it can actually make a recommendation based on thousands or even hundreds of thousands of recommendations to tell you what to read next. So it's an interesting service, and it's a lot of people don't know about their recommendation engine, but it's a really good one, and it trumps the Amazon one in a lot of ways. So it's worth knowing about. Okay, so now I'm going to hopefully wake you up a little bit with a video of this is a new service. It's not out yet. It's coming out for the iPad. It's called Liquid Text, and these are people that are really thinking differently about how we interact with text on these devices. So this is a couple minutes long, and I just want you to sit back and check this out because it's pretty mind-blowing. that's pretty interesting. I think it's supposed to be out for the iPad later this year. I'm not clear if it's a publishing platform or if a tool you can load text into it and do those interactions with it. But basically, it's getting at being able to use use this touch interface that we're now getting familiar with, and being able to manipulate text that way and annotate it and move it around and that kind of thing. So it's kind of thinking differently about how we approach that.
You also type in, is it, because that was mainly editing?
That was mainly editing. Yeah, it's not clear to me. There's not a lot of information on the site about it. So yeah, I think you might be able to, but I'm not sure. It might be you just load a text up there and you can easily annotate it and then go from there. But anyway, it's worth kind of keeping on your radar screen. It's interesting technology. And finally, as we move this shift into the mobile world, we're looking at these new publishing paradigms. And I'm not sure if you guys have talked about this today, but people are starting to rethink a little bit how they're going to publish for these devices and publish for this generation of folks that are more accustomed to shorter length things and that sort of thing. So these are 4 examples. BookRiff is a service that I think is launching this week, or maybe it's next week. It's launching soon. But it basically allows you to create a book from different aggregate resources that you have at your disposal. And you can share those with colleagues. You can either offer them for sale or you can offer them for free. They've worked a lot of deals with content providers to provide content into BookRiff that you can take and annotate into your own book. So if you're doing research on something and you've got a publisher who's got content on there, you can integrate it with your own content or your own comments and essentially create a book that you can share with somebody or share with a colleague or whatnot. Atavist is an interesting publishing platform. It's for kind of short form writing. It's for things that are longer than a magazine article, but shorter than shorter than a book, basically. It's got a really nice application for the iPhone and the iPad. And so the guy that developed it was like, look, I want to find a really good way to publish this shorter form or this medium form of writing. And so the Atavist was his solution to that. And you can integrate video and photos into the publishing system. He hasn't released it yet as a publishing tool, but I think he will soon. It's only been out for a year or 2 now. And then, yeah.
So the idea here is that people then can get feedback from other people on your stuff?
So, well, with BookRiff, I think that's possible. With the Atavist, it's really just strictly a one-way publishing platform. It's like I have some content I want to publish. And so, you have to buy content in Atavist, but it's just an example of, okay, I've got something that I've written that's not, maybe the length of like a research paper, for instance, and I've got some media that I want to put in there. And, you could use a platform like that to deliver that kind of content. So it would be nice to see them move into the more academic area where we have a new way. I think this will trickle down into academic publishing in terms of like journals and things like that.
I just think that this is going to kill the blogosphere, right?
Well, it could, yeah, it could have an impact for sure. And I think that it's a lot of the things that are in like the Atavist, the stories that are in there, they're longer reads. They're not like a blog post. They're well thought out, well crafted. A lot of it's journalism type work. But yeah, it could potentially have an impact, And then finally, Kindle Singles, you probably are familiar with that. Kindle released that maybe about a year ago. So Kindle Singles is for folks who want to publish very, shorter format pieces. And so it is really good for, say, research that you've already published in a journal and you want to get out there to other people. You can publish it through Kindle Singles. Or if you've got a shorter publication that you want to just rapidly throw out there, you can use Kindle Singles to do that. So again, it's a shorter format of publishing paradigm. And finally, I mentioned Blurb. You might be familiar with Blurb as a book publishing service. Well, they've got Blurb Mobile now, which is, again, getting at this fact that people are on the go, they're moving around, they're collecting photos, they're collecting videos, they're writing short pieces, and it can kind of pull them all together and publish them. So they're just examples, I think, of kind of the area that we're moving into as we sort of fill in the gray space between the long-form traditional book, the short blog post, or the short little tweet. You've got substantial writing that's not terribly long, but it has some meat and substance to it. These are the kinds of platforms that you can publish that kind of stuff on. And then finally, you all might have seen this application. It got a lot of press. It's a book, Al Gore's book on climate change called Our Choice. But it really ushered in kind of a new way of thinking about electronic books. And if you've not seen it, it's very different. And I've got a video here that I'll show you. The people that developed it, the company's called Push Pop Press, and they were actually bought by Facebook a few weeks ago. And Facebook bought the company for, well, these guys originally were going to develop a publishing platform. They developed this tool to publish, and they were going to sell it to publishers. You know, and make it available to publishers. Facebook bought them for what? Facebook bought them for the developers. So they've killed this platform. At least Facebook, I don't know. I mean, Facebook may use it at some point, but they really wanted the developers, the coders, and there were only 2 of them. But I just wanted to show you, our choice is available on the iPhone and the iPad, but it is a different way of delivering an electronic book. And I'll just show you this video, if you don't mind watching Alcor here for a second.
This app is a new kind of book that combines text and images, as well as video, interactive infographics, and my own audio commentary, all to help bring this important message to life. You can browse through the different chapters by swiping through the visual table of contents, or browse through a chapter by scrolling through the pages at the bottom. To start reading, use 2 fingers to pop a page open. To go back to the table of contents, just pinch the page down. You'll find images, movies, and interactive infographics resting on the pages throughout the app. You can pick anything up using 2 fingers and pop it open. Tap the globe in the corner to see a photo's location on an interactive map. Pinch to return to the page you were reading. Movies work the same way.
Most modern wind turbines consist of a large...
Some images unfold to reveal the other half. Some photos have audio commentary.
Industrial agriculture now uses 10 calories of energy.
A hand icon marks our choice's interactive infographics. Pop one open and use your finger to explore the data. I hope that you will enjoy this new reading experience and that it will help to inspire you to take action and to think in new and creative ways about how we can work together to solve the climate crisis.
So that's, well, the book is still available. I mean, but yeah, the company's gone. Facebook bought them. So the developers are really interesting. One of the developers worked at Apple as a teenager. He helped design a lot of the interface elements on the iPhone. And you know, they're kind of prodigies in terms of programming this kind of stuff. But it's very inspirational, and I think you're going to see more of this kind of thing. There's obviously a space there that needs to be filled. And so, you know, I think you're going to see more of that kind of thing showing up. But it really got people's attention when that came out. They're like, wow, this is different, and it's well done. It's not just taking text and images and throwing them into a digital context. So I just wanted to mention this because I think it's interesting. You all may be familiar with it, but some folks at the Simon Fraser University have taken WordPress and they've really turned it into a full-blown book publishing platform. And so it's not a blog. It's not. I mean, it's a blogging tool, but they've really turned it into a way to create a whole book with a table of contents and chapters and all that. And this book of MPub is worth looking at. I think if you're interested in, if you're already using WordPress or you have developers at your university that know how to use WordPress, you might want to just look at how they've done it, because it could be a nice, compelling, easy, low-cost way to take your content and turn it into a book form. It's going to live online, obviously, but it's going to be formatted and structured much like a book is, and not a blog, but a book. So it's just I thought it was interesting and worth mentioning here about what they do. No, it's not an app. No, it's using WordPress. It's just using the blogging platform, so it's not an individual app. And finally, you all might have heard, you all know about EPUB. You all probably been talking about that some today a little bit, or no? So EPUB is a new format of publishing, an open format of publishing that is starting to catch on. And what's cool about it, what's great about it, is that it's starting to integrate all these web technologies into the format. So you have HTML5, CSS3, SVG, which are scalable vector graphics, raster images, semantic types of things can be integrated into EPUB version 3. So EPUB 3 is kind of like HTML. You know, there's a group of people that sort of vet what the next iteration is going to be like, and version 3 is about to kind of be kicked out the door, and people are already experimenting with it. And it's a pretty low-hanging fruit format to use. And if you use Apple's Pages, you can actually export things in EPUB very easily. The iBooks application on the iPhone and iPad is actually an EPUB reader. And there's other free readers like Stanza, Eucalyptus. Those are two examples of some nicely done EPUB readers. Anyway, I'm going to show you a video of a company in France, a book publisher in France that's using EPUB 3. They're kind of doing a demo of what it's capable of. And so again, you've got a really nicely laid out, formatted book, but you can do all these really interesting interactive things that you couldn't do before. And so let me just roll this. This is a couple minutes here. This is a company called Walrus, and they're based in France, but I'm not sure exactly where. Just give you an idea what this format can do. EPUB is not a complex format. If you have developers that know HTML, that know CSS, things like that, JavaScript, they can do this kind of thing pretty easily with EPUB 3. And so it might be another thing to consider, you know, if you're wanting to venture outside the PDF realm and look at something like this, you know, take a small project and get it into EPUB format. Again, if you use the Mac platform or Apple platform, you can use Pages, which allows you to export or save your work as an EPUB. If you work with a web developer, you can build some of this into the book. So just something to think about. And so getting closer to the end here, I just want to talk a little bit about some skills for the sort of new era that we're in. And I think you're going to hear more and more about these three terms: curation, metadata, and serendipity. As we deal with this flood of information that we have to deal with every day, and our students deal with every day. You know, teaching them how to curate information becomes very, very important. I think that's a good role for instructors and faculty that know content really, really well. They're going to be able to know where you get the best resources and how to analyze those findings so that you can really use them in your learning. Metadata is becoming very important too for search purposes, for cataloging digital information, cross-linking things together. Information about information is going to become very, very important. And finally, serendipity, which is, I think, an area that is underrated, but it's very important. I mean, as we start to look at linkages of information across the web, you know, we find things that take us on completely new trajectories, completely new avenues. And so this ability to serendipitously find things and follow new paths for information and knowledge, I think, is really important. And as we sort of interlink this information more and more together, the opportunity for serendipity is becoming better. And I think it's kind of a rich area to go down in terms of finding new ways, to, you know, linkages with your research that you might not have seen before. And I think it's an interesting area. So you're going to probably hear a lot about that in the near future, those sort of three areas. So finally, the last thing I was going to talk about was just sort of emerging technologies in general. And basically, I just wanted to focus on a few things that are really, I think, coming into the forefront. They're becoming more and more, they're advancing quite a bit, and so I think they're going to be good. So one of them is voice recognition, and there's going to be some important distinctions here to make with voice recognition and some of these other things I'm talking about here. So Dragon Dictation, which is made by a company called Nuance, they have a very accurate dictation system, which you might have used. Once it's trained to your voice, it's very good at, you can dictate to it, and it can write whatever, or type out whatever you say. Google Voice, which is very integrated into the Android operating system for the Android devices, is also quite good at recognizing your voice and your commands. But they're just that. They're just voice recognition. They don't understand the semantics at all. They just recognize the words that you're saying. And sort of between that and then a more advanced form, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is this translation technologies, where Google Translate has come a long way. This sort of machine learning where you're learning to translate on the fly. I mean, I know Google Translate is not perfect. For people that really need to get their head around a foreign language web page or something easily, it's not bad. It can get you started. But what's more interesting is this app at the bottom here called WordLens. I don't know if you've seen or heard about WordLens, but it has gotten a lot of reviews, a lot of press, because it's very different from anything that's out there. Basically, it takes augmented reality on your phone. So you turn your camera on your phone, and you can point it at a sign in a foreign language, and it automatically translates that into whatever language that you want on your camera screen on your phone. So if you're reading signs, or it's pretty simple right now, but it's going to become more and more complex as the app develops. But it's really quite amazing. And right now it works with Spanish. I think there's a French dictionary that they're integrating. The app is free, and then you buy the language packs. And so I've got a couple of interviews with the developer, because it's really interesting, because he talks about the future of what we need to enable this kind of technology to improve, and then he talks about the challenges with developing this, because this is really cutting edge. And he really used pretty much everything that the phone has in it to make it happen. So if you want to just spend a couple of minutes here listening in. This is Otavio Good, and this is an interview with Robert Scoble, who's a famous blogger for Rackspace. But he's going to just hear him talk about
What was the hardest part technically to do on this?
I'd say this is one of the, this is the most technically challenging project I've ever worked on. And the hardest part was just that this iPhone, it's not as fast as your desktop computer. I had to just do every trick that I had to speed this thing up. I'm writing in assembly language and using the multimedia processor, just trying to do everything that I can do to speed this thing up. And even the thing that got released, it's a little bit choppy as far as the frame rate goes. There's still some improvements that can be done. They just take a little bit of time, and I'll get to them. But yeah, that was the hard part, is just making this thing fast. I spent a year and a half now just trying to make this thing faster. Yeah.
Well, it's great to meet somebody who actually puts real technology. We talk to so many companies that are doing like a website that, there's some technology there, but not assembler, and not trying to do something really bleeding edge that pushes us forward.
Yeah.
It's really a privilege to talk to you on that behalf. Do you have any?
So that's anyway, but it looks pretty simple, but there's a lot going on there. I mean, that's in real time, and that's pretty amazing to do that. So, but now he's going to talk a little bit about what he needs to push this forward to the next step here.
the technology, what's the gating factor on the phone? Because I imagine you're pushing the phone's technology further than any app, maybe other than a video game, is pushing it. What do you hope that Steve Jobs puts into the next iPhone to make your app even better, or make it possible to make it better?
Yeah, it turns out my background is in video games. I've done video games for game systems like Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, so I'm good at making graphics go fast. And this whole program is a big speed quality trade-off. If you gave me a supercomputer, this thing would be running much better than it is. But as far as what new phones could have, going to a dual-core processor, we can take advantage of a dual-core processor. Maybe a faster graphics chip, we can take advantage of that. And a better camera is something that's important for us. We can take advantage of the best camera that we can get, because sometimes this program, it has trouble when the camera can't get focus. That happens a lot in low light. There's a lot of problems with low light, and so the better the camera is in low light, the better the program is going to work. Sometimes the image gets motion blurred in low light, and that gives it some trouble also. And that's important for us because
So anyway, it's an interesting application, and I think if you've got students who are just learning a language, it's basic translation right now, and he really designed it for tourists that are going to be in a foreign place that they can just look at a sign and know what it says, or look at a menu. But I think if you have students that are learning a language, it can be kind of helpful just to kind of test. They can immediately test the feedback and okay, what do I think that says? What does that say? Okay, and they'll like he says, these are technology improvements that will help enhance this app. Well, guess what the iPhone 4S is going to have? It's going to have a dual-core processor. It's going to have a better camera, and it's going to have better graphics. And so, his application is probably going to run pretty well on the new phone. Anyway, it's interesting to look at that. People are thinking about how to use these kinds of devices and these technologies for language translation and that sort of thing. And that finally brings us to the last point that I want to talk about, and this is sort of the area that I think is really ripe for some mind-blowing stuff, and that's basically artificial intelligence. And so the new phone from Apple is coming out with this technology called Siri, which is actually the name of the company that they acquired. And they kind of tout it as your personal assistant, and it's very good at language recognition and semantics. And what a lot of people are kind of push it off saying, oh, it's just another voice recognition thing like Dragon Dictation or Google Voice. No, this is very, very different. And so Siri, just so you know what's behind Siri, the company was started by a guy who worked at the Pentagon for many years. He took his team from the Pentagon. They were working on this language recognition software. He started his own company called Siri. Apple bought it a couple of years ago. They spent the last couple of years building it into the operating system, and now it's going to appear in the new phone. And I think they released it now because they finally have a processor that can handle this kind of thing. But it basically knows, you ask it, you say, for instance, remind me to, pick up the cleaners when I leave work. Well, it defines your workplace. It puts up as they call it, a geofence, and when you leave that perimeter, it will ping you and say, hey, pick up your laundry or pick up your dry cleaning. And then it'll say, email my wife that I'll be home at 5:30 or whatever. Well, it knows who your wife is because if it's in your address book and it's listed as your wife, it knows that. It will create an email and send it for you. It will read your messages for you. You can say, is it going to rain today? It'll say, yes, there's a fairly good chance of rain today. It won't say, no, there's a 50% chance of rain today. It'll actually say, no, there's a good chance you should probably take your umbrella. It really will say that. And so there's a whole long list of things you can tell it. It won't get everything, but they're going to build more and more into it. So it's no, I think it's no exaggeration to say Siri will be game changing when it comes out in a couple of days. I think people are going to find a lot of uses for it that they didn't think they would have. And then finally, I could just mention a program. I was talking to Carl about this the other day. Devon Think is a database program that I use heavily. It's a Mac program, but it has some artificial intelligence built into it. So a lot of writers use it. And what it does is you collect information from literally anywhere, the web, on your local machine, whatnot, PDFs. It runs optical character recognition on PDFs. And what it does is that you build this database with categories that you define, and then over time it learns what you're putting in there. And then it begins to make associations with the content that you have in there. So if you have a lot of content, and say you're working on a research paper, you're working on a book, you can click on a passage and it will tell you, well, you've got 10 other things in your database that are related to this. It looks at the words that are in
So like
there.
imagine if you had like a learner language corpus.
Yeah, yep. It gives you, exactly. It'll give you a concordance of everything that's in the database. And you can basically, so what happens is you start to see, again, I go back to the serendipity again. So you start to see connections in your data that you didn't normally see before. And Stephen Johnson, who I mentioned before, uses this a lot, and he says it's helped him with getting started with chapters. It's helped him make connections and go off on tangents that he didn't ever think existed. But by this database sort of showing him connections in the research that he's pulled together, he says, oh, well, actually, there is a connection here between these things that I just didn't see before, and they sent him off on a new tangent, and he wrote a whole new chapter based on something that this was able to tell him that he wouldn't have seen normally.
And this is open? Or is this
No, it's a commercial application, but they're very supportive. They were academics who were actually, it's called Dev and Think because they are paleontologists, and so it's named after the Devonian, and you have a fossil icon for the application. They're based in Germany and here in the United States. They're a small company, but they've been around a while, and they've really polished this thing more and more. And they really support academics, so they have a pretty good discount for academic users. So they have several versions of the program. They all use the artificial intelligence engine that they've written.
what's the price?
The high-end version is like 100 and something, and the cheapest one's like $19 or something like that.
Will it support languages other than English?
Yes, it will. Yes, it supports a lot of languages. Yes, it will. And so it's a neat tool. I personally like it. A lot of people sort of can't get their head around it, but I think it's a neat tool, and I use it extensively. So anyway, that's all I have to really. And then Carl mentioned before the New Media Consortium. I worked as director of research for them for a little over a year, and they're a great source. They have these annual reports that come out. I still contribute to this every year, and the 2011 one is out now, and you can go to their website. nmc.org/publications and get that and download it for free. We did reports for K-12 market, museum market. We did some specific areas of the world like South America and that sort of thing. So anyway, it's worth checking out, and it's very easy to read. We designed it so it's small and compact. You can get through it pretty easily, and it's got some good ideas in there. So that's it, and if you have any questions or anything, there's my contact information.
So a round of applause for